I absolutely love the Star Wars saga. I've been a Star Wars fanatic since I was a little boy when the first movie, now known as Episode 4, was released in 1977. And not much has changed as far as this is concerned over the past 4 decades. I still even purchase Star Wars action figures to this day, but don't tell anybody. Oh, but check it out. I got the Mandalorian action figure. How cool is that?
This is the way.
But the movie known as Rogue One, a Star Wars story, is one of the best movies in the entire saga. I absolutely loved it. I saw the movie 3 times in the first 4 nights after its release, and I've since lost track of how many times I've viewed it since. I love how Rogue One fills in previously unexplained gaps in the Star Wars storyline, and I can't say enough about how awesome Darth Vader is in this flick. Be that as it may, one thing that initially struck me is that we can learn a lot about freedom and responsibility through one of the main characters, the droid they refer to as K2SO, another action figure. Well, K2SO, or K2 for short, was once the property of the evil Galactic Empire and programmed to act accordingly. The Empire originally programmed the droid to be one of the bad guys. Some might say that K2 was born into sin, but K2's story doesn't end there. You see, Cassian Andor of the Rebel Alliance apparently kidnapped, or should I say, droid napped K2, and then reprogrammed the droid to act according to the goals of the rebellion, which are antithetically opposed to those of the Empire. Now, K2 was not responsible for this reprogramming either. Cassian Andor was responsible for that much. So, thanks to the work of Cassian, K2 is now one of the good guys. Now, some might think that K2 used to freely act in accords with the droid's original programming, and if left to the droid's own devices, then would necessarily and freely act in accords with the goals of the Empire. Now, some contend that this is a form of free will called compatibilism. That is to say, as long as K2 is programmed to act in accordance with the evil Empire's goals, the droid will do just that, at least until another external force changes the droid's nature or programming. This doesn't seem worthy of the labels free or responsible, or so it seems to me. Now, because of Cassian Andor, K2 will act against its original programming and approximate to the droid's new and reprogrammed nature. K2 has no opportunity to think or act otherwise. You see, K2 is not a free thinker. The droid has been programmed to think a certain way and then reprogrammed to think a different way. K2 is nothing more than a passive cog who has no opportunity to exercise an ability to think or behave otherwise. K2 is not responsible and should not be held accountable for what the droid's programmers have causally determined. So, this so-called compatibilistic freedom seems to be nothing more than a word game. We can demonstrate this logically via a special Star Wars version of an argument originally offered by a great philosopher named Peter Van Inwagen. It goes like this. If determinism is true, then K2's acts are the consequences of the programming of the droid's past. But it's not up to K2 how the programmer chose to program the droid. Therefore, the consequences of K2's programming, including the droid's thoughts and actions, are not up to K2. So the consequence argument assumes two rules that demand examination. So the first one is called Rule Alpha, and that simply says this, that there's nothing anyone can do to change what must be the case. Rule Beta goes like this. If there is nothing anyone can do to change X, and nothing anyone can do to change the fact that Y is a necessary consequence of X, then there is nothing anyone can do to change Y either. This is intuitively obvious because if an event necessarily occurs from something that must be the case, then the event itself is necessary and we are powerless to stop its occurrence. This has been called the transfer of powerlessness principle. And as Robert Keynes says, another brilliant philosopher, he says, our powerlessness to change X transfers to anything that necessarily follows from X. In the case of K2, the droid was powerless to change its programming. K2 does not possess the freedom to choose to be programmed otherwise. And since the droid's actions are based upon the programming over which it's not responsible for, then K2 has no power to not act as the droid acts. You see, K2SO is powerless to think or act otherwise. He's got no control over the matter. The droid always acts based upon the programming of someone else. Now, compatibilists argue, hypothetically speaking, that K2 could have freely chosen otherwise if only the droid's programming would have been different. Well, great, but that doesn't seem to establish the guilt of the programmed and causally determined robot. It seems to highlight the guilt of the machine's programmer, or so it seems to me. As I've made clear, K2 was not responsible for its programming. K2's actions could not have been any different either. Even if the droid was free, whatever that means, to deterministically act according to its nature, which was causally determined by its programming, which was causally determined by the programmer, which is all outside of the droid's control. You see, we're not discussing how the droid could hypothetically act or not act if it was causally determined and programmed differently. We're discussing the prior programming which causally determined the thoughts and actions of K2 in the first place. You see, some Christians today incorrectly view humanity like droids in Star Wars. They contend that you and I have no responsibility over our programming. Now, some think that Adam and Eve freely chose to sin and thus programmed our current natures, which determines all of our current thoughts and actions. Some say that God is responsible for our programming by causally determining our sin nature. Either way, on this view, you and I are not responsible for the sin nature in which we find ourselves possessing. We are simply passive cogs at the mercy of the whims of programmers or reprogrammers. Some Christians suggest that the only way our programming or our nature can be changed is if we are programmed against our will, much like K2. This reprogramming is what they refer to as irresistible grace. And if God reprograms you, then you are causally determined to freely act according to your new programming. That is to say, if God reprograms you, then you will act according to his reprogramming. Now, on this view, humans are nothing more than droids. No human ever freely chooses to accept God's invitation of love and grace. God simply programs some to act in evil ways for all eternity, and then reprograms a few to say, I love Jesus.
These aren't the droids you're looking for.
These aren't the droids we're looking for.
What's really troubling with this view is that God has programmed most of the human droids to hate him. And then he holds those human droids responsible, accountable, and tortures them into the eternal fires of hell for actions outside of their control. Don't believe this popular but false and low view of God and humanity. Consider Molinism instead. Read my book. In conclusion, you are not a droid. You are not a passive cog. You are an active agent created in the image and likeness of the supernatural God. Unlike K2SO, you have a genuine opportunity to make a choice to resist God's love and grace and eternally divorce yourself from God, or to allow His love to transform you forever. It's your choice. It's up to you. Unlike K2SO, you are genuinely responsible for your thoughts, according to 2 Corinthians 10:5, and you are genuinely responsible for your actions, according to 1 Corinthians 10:13. So, as K2 would say,
congratulations, you are being rescued. Please do not resist.
Stay reasonable, and may the force be with you. Hey, if you found this video helpful, please like it, please share it, and please subscribe to our YouTube channel, Freethinking Ministries. Thanks a lot. Stay reasonable. See you next time.